point number 2 is, okay, so you might say, okay, fine, then it's not the feed. What are other ways that people are trying to reduce methane? They are trying to feed the cows this type of seaweed. So there's this idea that if you feed cows this type of red seaweed, you're able to decrease the methane that they produce. So here is some more data. Methane on the vertical axis, and then concentration or amount of this compound on the horizontal axis. And so what you see is that when you add 0.25% of this seaweed and 0.5%, the methane drops. But now, Kile, what I want to show you is that now this is seaweed. So seaweed and an injection, I think, is not likely, right? Because right now the experiments are about this seaweed. And the people are trying to use this seaweed to reduce this methane. So when people are asking, is this vaccine about methane, foot and mouth? What I want you to see is that it's hard for it to be about methane, because right now the primary options are either this cow feed or this seaweed, right? Now, the other thing that you mentioned is that some people, they have been saying that this is related to Bill Gates. So now here is where Bill Gates shows up. So there's a company that has developed this technology of this, using this seaweed, giving this seaweed to cows. They've developed it. And that company has funding from Bill Gates. So there's been discussion about the involvement of Bill Gates. So this is one place where he's involved. His company is involved in developing this product that comes from seaweed. So again, now the relationship to Bill Gates is to this seaweed company, but us, we are talking about this foot and mouth vaccine. So I don't know that they are necessarily related. So again, what I'm trying to do is kind of give facts and discuss what exists out there about all of these topics. Does anyone have any questions? Do you have any questions, Kimani?
Pia I think mimi kwangu nimeelewa na ile maswali ambayo tulikuwa tunauliza, na nilikuwa pia naulizia watazamaji, kwa sababu kuna watu ambao tumekuwa tukiona online wameteta sana. Okay, for you, maybe we can ask, depending to the information, okay, kuna pia watu naona wakiuliza kwamba how does they affect people, methane, kwa sababu nilikuwa nikisemekana ya kwamba ile injection, hiyo injection kumaanisha kwamba, ama hiyo injection ni kama inapunguza ile methane kwa wanyama. Sijui kama hiyo ndio ukweli.
So the reason I'm showing all this data is it's hard for me to believe hiyo ni ukweli, because so far what I've shown you is 2 solutions to minimize methane. Number 1 is this feed that is being made, and this feed, it has this compound called 3-NOP, and they are saying that it decreases the methane in, these are beef cattle, and there are currently studies to minimize the amount of methane in dairy cattle, but it's in feed. So it's not likely to be what's happening in January. I mean, again, I don't know for sure, but this treatment is a compound that's given in feed. If we've been told these are vaccine injections, then they are not likely, right? Option number 2 is this idea of this seaweed, because now seaweed also reduces methane. But what we are understanding is that this company is still in development. But actually, the most relevant point, or the more relevant point, is that this compound that is made by this company, it is fed to the cows in their food. So what this company does is they extract the key active compounds from the seaweed, and then they package it into the food. At least that's what their website says. So then it's not likely that the cows are going to be given seaweed, right? So then what? So now, what is the other solution? Because what I'm trying to do, I hope I'm being clear here, I'm trying to talk about where things can overlap. Because watu wamesema this vaccine that is of January 2025 is a methane vaccine. So what I'm trying to do is talk about what exists in this world of methane reduction, and we ask ourselves, what is the likelihood that this 2025 treatment is a methane vaccine? That's our question. Because people were asking us, what is the relationship between methane and this vaccine of 2024? Right? Or 2025. That was the question. So what I'm doing is I'm showing, okay, this is what exists in this world of methane vaccines and methane emission treatments. So that we understand, okay, is it likely that what we are going to see in January 2025 is a methane vaccine? That's the question we are trying to ask ourselves. I don't have an answer. I'm just giving information to help someone kind of understand. The last kind of piece, because I want people to think about this as puzzle pieces. We are giving them puzzle pieces so they can see the picture and so they can understand what on social media is true versus false. So the last piece of the puzzle is there somewhere where there is a vaccine that is in development against methane? Because, I've told you about feed and I've told you about seaweed, but is there somewhere a vaccine? The answer is if you've listened to us talk about vaccines, in the interest of time, I won't go into detail, but there's videos on the channel about vaccines. What you know is that a vaccine is typically against a disease, a pathogen, right? And so I won't, again, in the interest of time, I won't go into so much detail, but there's a really good review that showcases the different pathogens, the different vaccine strategies that have been used against pathogen. So, for example, for the smallpox disease, there was a vaccine that was made against a live smallpox, and that was the vaccine that you're given. So basically, a vaccine is a mimic of what you're trying to kill. So again, we ask ourselves, okay, does this exist for methane? And is that what is being given in 2025? Again, we don't know, but it does exist for methane. Because what can happen is people can make vaccines against the microbes that ferment the plant material. So it's possible. And when I looked it up, I found out actually that there are two companies that are making methane vaccines. And so there's one company that has been funded by Jeff Bezos and another company that has been funded by Bill Gates. And these companies are developing vaccines to minimize methane. Interestingly, if you look into these companies and if you look into what they're doing, it seems like all of this work is currently still in development. So if you look on the web page of the company that is this one that's funded by Bezos, what they tell you is they're trying to develop, they're trying to understand the biology of this, the immune system of the cow. That's what they're trying to understand. They say here that they are not necessarily trying to develop a vaccine specifically. So, and then if you look in the other company, what they tell us is they're also developing, they show us their workflow. They tell us that they're defining the targets in the rumen microbiome. So we've talked about the rumen. The rumen is the stomach. The microbiome is a community of microbes that are in the stomach. So they tell us that this is they tell us the workflow and the way that they're trying to develop this vaccine. And from what they say, which I mean, I don't know for certain, but from what they say, it's still in the process. So now this brings us then to our question. Okay, so if that is what exists according to the research that I did on social, just like on the internet, is it likely that that is what is being given to the cows in 2025? As of today, it seems like that's a bit hard to connect. Is it impossible? No, nothing's impossible. Is it likely? Not so high based on what I've been reading. So I think as I close, I think now we are getting, sorry?
Okay, go on. Malizia ndio tuweze kupitia maswali za watu.
Yeah. So I think to finish, we go back to the concerns of these lawmakers. And the thing is, their concerns are valid. Like their job is to ask questions and to make sure that wananchi they are protected. Like that's their job. So it makes sense that they're asking these questions. So with regard to Honorable Wamuchoba's question about methane and the likelihood that this vaccine has to do with methane, based on what we've seen already in this research of where the research is right now in the world of methane vaccines, it's hard to think that those are connected based on what we've read, right? Now, with regard to Honorable Musyoka's concern about DNA alteration, you might wonder, okay, you've talked about all these vaccines. Have you talked about DNA alteration and what would be altered? Is it the cows? Are we saying that the cows are going to be altered?